So welcome back, everybody. I'm sure that it was not easy to get back in here when the sun is shining outside like this, but I'm also sure that it will be worth it, because now it's time for our first keynote delivered by Dr. Lujendra Ojha from Johns Hopkins University in Maryland in the United States. I won't say much more about him, because Lujendra will be probably introduced by Beth Ambers in a minute. So it's my honor to introduce Beth to you a little bit closer. She's the executive officer of the Council on Undergraduate Research, CUR. Already as an undergraduate student, she found undergraduate research just as you. One of the best ways to learn, and when she later became a geology professor at California State University, she worked on ways to establish and expand undergraduate research opportunities for her students. So she's very passionate about our topic of this congress. Two more very important things about her. First, as we already heard, she serves as member of the Congress Committee, and she has done a lot of work. She's developed a lot of ideas on what's going to happen the next couple of days. And she knows Lujendra Ojha way better than I do. That's the second thing. And therefore, she will now introduce him properly to us. Please, Beth, the stage is yours. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Jan. And willkommen, guten Tag, wie geht's? So I'll start with that. Wonderful to be here. And it does give me great pleasure to introduce this morning's keynote speaker, Dr. Lujendra Ojha, or Luju, as he is known more informally, or I understand Max for Starbucks pickup orders. So Luju has accomplished much in less than 3 decades on planet Earth, best known thus far for his studies of another fascinating planet, Mars. He was a key discoverer of evidence for the existence of water on Mars, and he accomplished this work starting while an undergraduate student at University of Arizona, conducting research with faculty member and mentor Alfred McEwen and other scientists and colleagues. The significance of Luju's research cannot be overstated. As we discuss here, many aspects of the globe's health, economy, politics, communications, environment, and the world we create, Luju and colleagues are looking to planet Mars as a place that once may have held the conditions for water and for life. A little bit about Dr. Ojha's professional accomplishments thus far. After completing his undergraduate degree in geophysics with a minor in planetary science, Luju progressed to his PhD in planetary science at Georgia Institute of Technology, obtaining his degree in his mid-20s, and continuing to postdoctoral appointments at Johns Hopkins University in Maryland, USA. He has already co-published more than 20 professional papers and made more than 70 conference presentations. And this does not include his TED Talk, which you can find via Google, and several other presentations online on the internet. Achieving many honors already in his career, including prestigious fellowships, grants, and awards. He was named one of Forbes 30 Under 30 in Science in 2015. And this fall, Dr. Ojha will transition from his Johns Hopkins research scientist appointment to an assistant professorship at Rutgers University in the state of New Jersey in the United States. Now, this Congress, as we have heard, and as we will see, is all about transformative and significant research and the opportunity for exchange, for crossing borders, for interdisciplinarity, and for building connections and partnerships. Born and spending the first half of his life in Nepal, Luju came to the US with his family at the age of 15 as a self-described, perhaps, Nepalese American. He has indeed crossed many boundaries and climbed many mountains, often literally. A Renaissance man, or in US English, we sometimes say jack of all trades. In addition to his achievements as a scientist, he has had a career also as a death metal guitarist. Very important for those of us here in Germany, one of the centers for death metal. So several years ago, our organization, the Council on Undergraduate Research, awarded him our signature honor, our honorary fellowship. And at that time, Lujendra gave several talks to students attending our Posters on the Hill annual event, which is our way in the United States of showcasing the best and brightest individuals to federal funders. When I heard the passion, humor, and care that Lujendra shared with these students, I knew him as a leader and a charismatic speaker. I know that we will be inspired by his remarks this morning. Please welcome Dr. Lujendra Ojha, this morning's keynote speaker, and as we would say in the US, a true rock star.
All right, let's see, does this work? All right, let's get this. All right, thank you, Dr. Beth Ambos. That was one of the most kindest and most flattering introduction that I've ever had. So I will try to live up to the hype. Thank you really to the organizers of this Congress. I think this is such a fabulous, just a great event. And I'm really looking forward to meeting so many rock star students from 35 different countries. Also want to thank the students from University of Oldenburg. We went to Bremen yesterday and they worked really hard and they made it, they went an extra mile to make us feel at home. So thank you very much. And really, congrats to all of you. This is a huge, huge achievement, right? I mean, there's so many people applying for this prestigious event, and you're here. And the fact that you're here means that you are some of the brightest, some of the most fascinating personnel on the world right now, and we need your help to tackle some of the big problems we're going to be seeing in the future. My personal story, like Beth said, was in 2012. I was invited to a similar event. And that Poster on the Hill event not only allowed me to meet so many other really bright individuals, but it also helped me really navigate through grad school and find a job. The fact that I presented in that sort of program meant that I would my CV, my resume looked just a tad bit better than most of the applicants. So it helped me find great grad school. And then I went to grad school, and the fact that I had presented in an event like this also made me look a little bit better than other applicants when I was applying for external fellowships. So my entire graduate school was funded by these fellowships, and the fact that you're here is really going to help you in the career going forward. And so I will not talk much more about that, but if you ever want to reach out to me for advice or my own personal path through this, you can find me through my website, through my email, or some of the young people that like to take selfies and do Instagram stuff. I started on Instagram as well, so you can find me there. So let's move on to the important topic. Beth asked me to do a really, really hard task. She said, there's going to be all these smart people from 35 different countries, so can you come and give a talk? That applies to all of you. All of you do something very, very different. And I study planets. So I had to come up with a topic that means something to all of you, right? To all of us. And so what started as sort of like, okay, I'm just going to read a bunch of journals and like make a talk for you guys, turned into this realization that, holy crap, this is a pretty bad situation, right? So I will try to give you sort of like a summary of what I found in the last 2 months and how I think we collectively as a global species need to work on this together. Okay, so like Beth said, I'm a planetary scientist. Most of my time is spent looking at Mars, Mercury, Venus, Moon, Earth, right? And the fascinating thing about the solar system is that we have 4 rocky planets. Mercury, the closest one to the sun. The temperature there exceeds 500 degrees Celsius when it's facing the sun. There is no magnetic field protecting life or any sort of carbon species. So life is completely impossible in a planet like that. Then we go to Venus. It has a massive atmosphere of carbon dioxide. And because of that, you have what's called an induced greenhouse effect. The temperature on the surface of Venus is enough to melt lead. There is no magnetic field on Venus. And as far as we know, life cannot exist in a planet like that. Then we have Earth, that beautiful, beautiful Earth, with water, with magnetic field, with all the ingredients necessary for life, right? And that's the only home that we have ever known. Then we have Mars. And Mars is interesting, right? Because when we look at Mars, it seems like there was abundant amount of liquid water flowing in the past. And when I say past, I mean about 4 billion years ago. When you look at the surface of Mars, there's no doubt that there was a lot of liquid water flowing back in the day, which is what we need for life. But now when we look at Mars, all that water is in the form of ice, mostly in the polar caps. Much like Earth, with our north and south polar cap, Mars has polar caps, right? You can see one here, the south polar cap, that's the ice south polar cap, and that's a vast amount of water. But that's it. And we don't know if life ever originated there. So the key point here is that all the vital necessary things that we need to survive, to be human, to be collective species, is here on Earth. And that's about the only place in the solar system where we have that. And for most of Earth's history, right, so geologists, they look like Beth, they look at rock record, they find fossils, they find chemical signature, and we can date Earth. We know based on rock record, we know based on meteoroids that we get from outer planets that the solar system formed, including all these planets, Mars, Earth, Venus, Mercury, formed about 4.5, 4.6 billion years ago. We think that life probably came to Earth, originated on Earth about 4 billion years ago. And through most of the history of Earth, life and the resources we have on Earth were in the sort of harmony, right? But then came the age of humans, this very top one. Let's look at that a little bit closely. So we know based on fossil record that humans, these like upright walking humans, came to Earth about 6 million years ago. In these fossils that we find from about 2.6 million years ago, we find the first evidence that humans had started exploiting the resources. They had taken rocks and made them sharp so we could cut meat, so we could eat. About 10,000 years ago is when we start seeing evidence for agriculture and animal husbandry. Humans relying significantly on resources for their survival. And that was fine. That was fine for most of humanity, for most of the humanity that we have existed, right? So this is the population in y-axis and sort of like the years in the last 10,000 years in x-axis. And what's clear is that for most of human history, we've lived in this sort of harmonic balance with nature. But in the last 500 years, the population has expanded exponentially. The population right now is about 7 billion. And this is a peril of exponential growth, right? Because this is the expected population growth by the end of the century. If we keep the population growth at the same rate we're seeing right now, we're going to exceed 18 billion people on Earth. If we become more optimistic, if we become more cautious, and if we're better about what the heck we're doing, maybe the population will stick to 9 billion. But regardless, if that doesn't happen, then we need to understand the perils of exponential growth. And there's a real great story that every civilization has. Every culture has their own version of the story. The one that I'm familiar with is the mythology of this king in India who was really, really good chess player, right? No one could defeat him. So he was super arrogant, and he said, I will make a challenge. I invite anyone from the world to come play a game of chess with me. If I lose, I will give you anything that you want. Now, this was heard by one of the demigods of the Hindu mythology, Krishna, and he turned himself into an avatar. He came back to Earth, and he said, okay, I heard a challenge. I will play with you, but if I win, this is what I need. There are 64 spaces in the game of chess. And he said, if I win the game, For every square there is on the chess, give me double that value. So the first is going to be 1 grain. On the second, he's going to double the grain. Third, double. So it's just like a doubling effect, right? The king said, sure, that sounds something that I can easily pay. Let's play. The king was playing against the demigod, right? So the king obviously lost. And when it came time to pay, the king realized that the amount of grains, by the time you get to the 64th square, equals 10 to the 19 grains. That's about 210 billion tons of rice, more rice than we've ever produced as a human collective species until 1950. The king realized, the king understood the perils of exponential growth, apologized, and then the demigod, being benevolent that he was, he said, okay, apologies accepted, don't be arrogant, and that was it. But the problem is that we don't have a demigod that's going to come back and say, humans, you made a mistake, I'm going to forgive you. And this was much, this has been understood for a long time. This is Rob Malthus, an English cleric and scholar, and I think he put it best, that the power of population is indefinitely greater than the power in the earth to produce subsistence for man. And so what are the subsistence that we need to be humans? We need natural resources to grow food, mostly soil, water, organic matters, minerals that allows us to grow food. We need resources for energy production. We're such energy-craving species. Everything we do, we need energy. Your cell phone, your transportation, the fact that I'm in Germany, it all relies on energy. The other thing that we really, really rely on is stuff that we need to build infrastructure. This place here, cement, concrete, steel, metal, heavy metals, right? But the one thing that's common between all these resources are that there are finite amount of these resources on Earth. There's only X amount, and the problem has been that we've been harvesting them in a very, very rapid and fast fashion. So to show you some examples, so what is the soil? Soil is mostly 25% air, there's some water, there's organic matter, and then there's some minerals, phosphorus, da-da-da, right? Now, this is a geological process. You just don't create soil. Soil is created through geological processes, and it takes a long time to make soil. The production rate is about 10 to 100 millimeter per year, right? But the erosion rate of soil that we see from any sort of geological processes, like water-related, air-related, or just the fact that we're over-harvesting the same soil, is orders of magnitude higher. And so what that means is that by 2050, we need to increase the agricultural efficiency by almost 70 to 100%. So this either means that we have to somehow miraculously come up with a way to grow more plant per square mile of soil we have, and that's where you guys come in. Maybe you guys have great ideas to do that. Or the other alternative is that we go and cut down more woods, cut down more trees, and you use production in those soils. And this is scary, right? Because we're already in a very volatile state. So this is how much grains we make versus how much grains we consume as a function of year. And the scary thing here is that if you look at the production and consumption, they are par to par. If, for example, next year, there's a really, really bad famine, and we have a terrible harvest, there's an ultimate calamity because the grain stock from the previous year will only feed the global population for 62 days. So think about that. We are one bad harvest away from a global sort of catastrophe. And this is not only a problem for soil scientists among you, or the applied physicists, or like chemical engineers. This has massive amount of health problem, policy problem, engagement problem, and economic problem, right? And it has massive amount of implication in like the social structure of civilization. For example, in 2007, 2008, the price of grain doubled overnight, and that led to food riot in almost 60 countries. Countries like India and Brazil, they actually stopped exporting their grains because they had to feed their own population. In 2010, 2011, similar thing happened, and that helped with the Arab Springs. Every single day, 35 farmers in India commit suicide because they can't pay enough money to their landlord because the soil quality has declined. That's 13,000 people committing suicide per year in India because they can't grow enough food as they promised their landlord. And we haven't even approached the topic of water. You need water to grow plants. Where do we get the water? Yeah, you get a little bit of rain, but most of the time we're harvesting the water from these underground aquifers. What's happening in India right now is that they have depleted this near source of water, and they're tapping into the super deep aquifer. Sometimes they're drilling as much as 3 kilometers to get to this deep reservoir. Almost half the electricity made in India is used to irrigate this water out from this deep source, right? But what happens when we run out of that water? Many of my planetary friends will probably tell you that, yeah, we can go to Mars. Because like I said, Mars has a polar cap, right? So this is a North Polar cap. That's about 2 times the size of Texas, to those of you that are Americans. It's got half the volume of ice we see in Greenland, right? Sure, we can get water from Mars, or we can get water from comets, asteroids, but the problem is technology. It takes about $10,000 to put 1 pound of materials in space. Forget about engineering constraint of going there, harvesting the water and bringing it back, or even the cost of just going to space is tremendous. And so this is where you come in. Maybe you have ideas about this, right? Maybe you have thought about this. The problem is not just limited to resources required for food production. Let's talk about energy, right? If we look at fossil fuels, in the last sort of like the first sort of 50 or 60 years of the 20th century, we discovered a lot of sites where we can harvest, we can extract oil. And we have peaked the harvest rate at around 2005 to 2010. Now, we haven't discovered oil sites at the same rate. And so it's predicted that by the end of the century, when the population is going to be exponentially higher than what we have today, they're going to have 20 to 30% of the energy coming from fossil fuels. And so this means, globally, as a human species, we need to think about alternative powers like hydropower, right? This map shows the potential from each country to generate hydropower. I'm from Nepal. Nepal is right over there, to those of you that don't know their geography. We can generate 84,000 megawatts of electricity per year in Nepal. The last time I heard, it was about 1,000 megawatt that we had harvested, right? And so the political corruption and the spineless git politicians of Nepal hasn't allowed any of these things to happen. And so this is not just a problem for people who are thinking about engineering constraint, but those of you that are from Nepal, right? We need to think about this in terms of like, how do we make the next generation work towards this? There's also environmental problem. Like, if you use every single dam that you can use to make hydropower, then that has massive environmental implication for life that lives in water, right? And so we need sort of like people from different fields thinking about these sort of stuff. Solar power, right? Do you know how much land area we need to cover to basically provide all the energy that we need right now? 1% of the Sahara Desert. That's it. That's all we need to cover with solar panels to provide. Every single hour, the sun produces more energy than we use in an entire year on Earth. But it's really an untapped market because there's both problems with science, engineering, but there's also a problem with, you have to put a massive amount of solar panels, and if you put a massive amount of solar panels in Sahara Desert, you need to bring that electricity all the way to China, right? And there's also a problem about taking away land from animals that might be living there, right? But these like little boxes that you see are places where we can install solar panels to make this actually happen. And so the future generation really needs to think about this as a viable alternative. Now let's talk about resources required for infrastructure to build houses. If you think about China, for example, China used more concrete in the last 3 years than the United States has used in the entire century. right? There's been such rapid production of houses and infrastructure in China, but there's finite amount of resources we have. If you think about iron, for example, this is how we get steel. This is how we get iron. These are called banded iron formation. Some of these formations are as old as the Earth itself, like going back to about 4 billion years. This is formed geologically. It doesn't happen overnight. You need processes that take long amount of time to make these things. But if you look at how fast we're extracting them, look at that, right? In the sort of last 20 years or so, we have extracted them in such a rapid rate that it's simply not sustainable. And it's not just iron. Let's look at other metals. All these heavy metals that we need to make your electrical devices work, your cell phones, your gadgets, your computers, whatnot, we're extracting them at a rapid scale. And again, just like iron, we have finite amount of those materials on Earth. A lot of times what we see is that these e-waste are dumped into third world nations, right? So these so-called e-waste cities, people go and find these old electronics, discard it, and they harvest these precious metals, often in very sad and depressing situation. Here's a woman in China in this sort of like silicon mountain, extracting precious metals, often getting paid about $2 to $3 a day. Here's another view of that, right? This is a woman in India, basically taking long rolls of wire, burning off the plastic outside coating, and extracting copper. There's a little 4-year-old kid working there. You know, this is the reality, right? There's this disparate like income segregation, like, and you know, to make a recycle happen, we dump it in other places so they can do the dirty work. This is a place outside New Delhi. They put all the silicon chipboards from your electronics in this acid vat. They melt all the silica of the motherboard, for example, and extract the precious metals. There is no regulation. Where's all this toxic going to go? To your land, right? And so this is, again, like to reiterate, like the point that I was making, that all of these problems, they're not just scientific problems. They're not just problems that are related to resource. These problems need to be solved from both like science, engineering, you know, like policy, environmental aspect, like health. I mean, everything that you guys do, you have the chance to do something about all these situations that we're seeing. And so really, to sum up this point, right, that the power of population is really greater than the power in the earth to provide subsistence. And we need to think about this very deeply. Like I talked about space mining. Space mining is possible. Like asteroids, in the asteroid belt itself, they have the capability to, I think, generate like $1 trillion worth amount of metals. But there are substantial engineering and scientific problems with that, right? And so it might be a reality, but at least it's not a reality for the next 20 or 30 years. But if the population is to expand the way we expect it will, then even if you could mine the entire solar system, there's only finite amount of resources in the solar system. And when you think about resources like soil, where you need organic matter, where you need phosphorus, where you need these elements to grow food, that's not going to come from space. So saying that we're going to go to another planet and rely on those resources is not really a good idea. What might be a better approach is the fact that we can control the population here on Earth, right? And so this is a plot that shows fertility rate as a function of education of women. And I think this is one of the most important things I urge you to take away from this conference, is that women's education is not only a matter of human rights. This is something that we need to help control this dooming catastrophe that we might be heading towards. So it doesn't matter where you're from, it doesn't matter where you're going. I urge you all, wherever you go, to make this a priority. More than anything, I think that time is our scarcest resource. Because if we don't act now, it's going to be too late. much like that story of this arrogant king playing chess with Lord Krishna, we're going to hit that tipping point, and after that, there is no coming back. We've already seen adverse effect with climate. We've already seen a lot of effect with environment produced by Earth. So we need to act fast, and we need to act now. And you guys being the top minds of the world right now, you know, the one thing that I can tell you is study hard. This is the words of late Nobel Prize winning physicist Richard Feynman. He's awesome. But he said, study hard what interests you most in the most undisciplined, irreverent, and original manner possible. Do not reinvent the wheel. Do not reinvent the path that someone else had already done. Be undisciplined, be crazy, be rebel in science. Because history is never made by people who follow rules in science. You need to think outside of the box. And there are these grand challenges where we need your help to think outside of the box. All right? And sort of the only thing that I wanted to say is this. This is the view of Cassini spacecraft. This is the view of Earth from Cassini spacecraft. The rings that you see here are the rings of Saturn. God liked Saturn so much that he put a ring on it, right? But here, this tiny little dot, that's home. That's Earth, right? That's how small we are. There's 7 billion of us walking around thinking that we're invincible. We're just going to take every damn resource that's available for our own consumption. But how long is humanity going to survive? If we are to survive for the next 1,000 years, 2,000 years, 3,000 years, how is this sustainable? Because that little blue dot is all we got. So take this time. You have an opportunity to meet the smartest people from 35 different countries. Network. If you're American, don't just talk to Americans. Go talk to someone else from across the world. Make friends. Chances are one of you from this crowd is probably going to be a president of the nation that you're from. Or chances are one of you is going to win the next Nobel Prize, right? Doesn't matter. Just take that time, make connection, and remember that when the evil called Voldemort attacked Hogwarts, 4 houses united to defeat that evil. In Lord of the Rings, 19 houses combined to defeat the evils of the Mordor. And in Game of Thrones, everyone except the damn Lannister fought against the evil. So you guys are good. I'll be more than happy to talk to you over the conference. It's going to be a great event. Thank you very much. I'll take any questions.
Thanks so much again. I think we could have kept listening to you for a way longer time, but it's great that you leave us some time, some room for questions. Yep. I'll take the opportunity to ask the first question. What makes you optimistic that we will live up to this very existential challenge that we're facing? What makes you optimistic?
I think if you look at the history of sort of species that have survived on Earth, right? What is the most adaptable species? That's human. You see humans living like as nomads in the sub-Saharan desert to like people living in the Arctic regions, right? We are one of the most adaptable species, right? And I think, you know, we have 10,000 years of history to prove that we can be optimistic, but we need to act on it. Mm-hmm. So.
Thanks so much. So we are adaptable. Take your chance to ask questions. Yes, and I think there should be where's the microphone? I'll take this from you.
Sure.
Maybe you just pass that on.
Hi, my name is Ice. Thank you so much for your presentation. I really enjoyed it.
Sure.
I just had a few more questions on when you talked about women's schooling and fertility rate. Could you talk more about what the connection that had to improving our environment or helping with the progression of our species?
Yeah, I think like the bottom line there is that, you know, one of the things that we can control to make our world sustainable in the long run is that we need to control population. Now, if you look at where most of the population rise is happening is in places that are undeveloped or places that are developing, right? Where not even just women's rights, but like fundamental human rights, such as like access to family planning, access to like birth control, is sort of like a taboo thing, right? You know, and so like the connection there is that, you know, as long as we can make women empowered, give them choices, that's ultimately going to be the saving grace. Because a lot of times they don't have any education, they're under scrutiny from the society, they don't have access to something as fundamental as, you know, birth control or family planning. And I think that's where when they don't have sort of like the will to do what they want, then they're going to be doing what the society asks them to. But give them will, give them power, give them the education, give them the facts like this, that overpopulation is a thing. And I think that as long as we know that, hey, we're killing our own planet, we're not going to make those mistakes. But a lot of people don't know this fact, right? I mean, we're talking about, like, for example, in Nepal, I spent 2 months in November there doing field work. There's absolutely no idea. People have no idea what the heck's going on with the environment, right? And that's just because they don't have access to education.
Is it okay if I ask a follow-up
Sure,
question?
go on.
What do you think about finding more resources for maybe contraception for male counterparts to help with that as well?
Wait, sorry, repeat the question.
How do you feel with finding contraceptives and also the same kind of programming for the male counterparts to help with the population?
Oh, I think that's great. Someone should work on that.
Thank you.
Thanks so much. Are there any more questions to Lujendra? Okay. Back there. All right.
Hi, everyone in attendance. My name is Letu. I have just one question for you. Considering the impact that mining has had on Earth generally, you did point out that space mining is somewhat a solution for the resources that we are extracting right now at a high rate. But considering like the effects of mining that we see in Earth right now, what are the implications of that in future in terms of our universe? Because we do understand that the planets work holistically for different things. So if you kind of introduce mining as you've done on Earth, it kind of affects that, and what's the greater implications of those?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so if we can do space mining, right, one thing that will be alleviated is the environmental impact that we do on Earth. But the bigger problem with space mining, and there are some that would totally disagree with me, is that we're just not there technologically yet. It's going to take at least 100 more years, conservatively, I would say, that before that becomes a reality, right? And there are philosophers and scientists now talking about, okay, is even space mining sustainable over the long run if the exponential growth is to remain exponential? You need to think about, like, human as species. We have survived for 10,000 years. If we need to survive for 10,000 more years, you know, like, and you have this like an exponential growth, yeah, sure. There's probably a chance when we might even run out of all the resources we have in the solar system. Then what? We don't have the technology of interstellar to go from one solar system to another. The laws of physics bound us to X amount of time to travel from one place to another. So if we use everything that we have in our capacity, then what? Yeah, so I think while it provides a novel solution in terms of like, yeah, it'll be better for the environment, I think like long-term thing is that we can't just keep relying on infinite amount of resources. There's no such thing as infinite amount of resources. The only thing that we can do is work on sustainability.
All right. Next question.
Hello, everyone. My name is Lucanio from South Africa. My question is, I think it's really, I don't know whether it's simple or not, but you in your talk, you spoke quite often about the need to come up with solutions with regards to the problems that you have identified. Now, with the level of thinking that we have right now in world politics, in our countries, it seems as if it does not go deep enough in order to try and understand the current situation that we find ourselves in. How do we then start developing critical minds and critical thinking in order to respond to the questions and the challenges that have been posed? Thank you.
Undergraduate research. That's my answer. Well, or like research of any kind. Like a personal example is that often, I mean, one of the values of undergraduate research is that when people who are doing their undergrad come into the research program, they come with no preconceived notion about what is the proper way of doing, what is the improper way of doing. In other words, they are truly an undisciplined rookie amateurs that do think outside of the box, and then they taper into this perfect scientist, right? So I think there are solutions. I mean, and maybe there are no solutions to some of these impending problems, but I think the one thing that we can definitely try and do is that we can have the youngest and the sharpest minds of our generation to work on those problems, because, dude, we need help, right? And it is without a doubt that this generation and the coming generation will pay for the sins and the atrocities committed by generations like ours and the ones before that were not cognizant of the impact that we're going to make in the environment. So this generation, coming generation, will have to pay the prices, and the only thing we can do is hope that the sharpest minds can figure out something. So give them education, give them access to research. In places like, we're from Nepal, I was talking to a bunch of my brothers from Nepal, and there is no resources. And so it's a global problem, and the political sort of side of things need to step up and say, we need to spend more money on scientific research.
We are seeing a lot of Friday for Future demonstrations right now. What do you expect from them to make people change their minds from those demonstrations? Do you think this is something that will stay, or is it just... Because in Germany it's really big right now.
Yeah, and I think, I think, like, I don't know if I can speak for all the Americans, but like in myself, like, and I see Germany and the Scandinavian regions as being these progressive mindset that are thinking about these problems very seriously, right? And so I think, yeah, that's great. And I don't know what exactly that they're doing, but I think, any sort of protest or any sort of like social activism to understand this problem, to make people aware, I think that's critical.
But you seem a little bit pessimistic about spreading this to the rest of the world, this kind of movement.
Sorry, what was it?
You seem a little bit pessimistic about the Fridays for Future movement to spread to the rest of the world?
I really hope it does. And if that's one of the things that you all should consider. Talk to your German friends and see what they're doing to make this climate change and like the environmental impact less. Talk to them, get some ideas, and go to your nations and act on those. Because, again, it's a global problem.
All right, next question. Sorry.
Hi. There's a documentary called Water Wars. Have you seen that? It's about how some countries, although they're not publicly doing things to save things, are positioning themselves to take control of key water areas, including, I think, Nepal, but also in other parts around the Middle East places. I wasn't sure from the movie how advanced that is and how real it is. Do you have any insights into that, and whether or not the countries that are affected have any awareness of...
Yeah, so, this is a crazy thing, right? So when Beth asked me to come give a talk, I was like, yeah, I'm going to talk about like these environmental stuff. Everyone's talking about it. It's the buzzword, not knowing much, right? And I still don't know much. And like, based on sort of my like readings in the last 2 months and everything, like, and I can tell you that, for example, India now is looking to rent land from a lot of, I think, Portugal and I think Uruguay, because they are running out of the irrigatable land, right? Nepal is a whole can of worms, right? Because there are no efficient politicians running the country. It's a bunch of lunatics running the country, and it's not because we want to conserve the water that we're not sharing the water. It's just there is no system. Yeah, there's no leadership there. But I know, yeah. I mean, when the grain crisis happened, a lot of countries did the same thing. They saved their grains to be on the safer side. And if the water crisis is supposed to happen, I'm sure a lot of countries are going to be doing the same thing. somewhere else. Yeah.
All right, next question.
Hello, everyone. Thank you, Dr. Ojha, for your nice presentation. I really enjoyed it. It's me, Dikshit Paudel from Nepal. As you have pointed that the importance of undergraduate research, I have just been graduated from one of the university, and it's I feel proud saying that I'm from one of the renowned university of Nepal. I'm the student of agriculture science, and I'm conducting my research in economics and health. So my experience being in 3 universities of Nepal, among 10 universities, I went to labs. They can be of biological science, they can be of physical science, but I could not see even the well-equipped laboratories in Nepal. So this can be the problem of most of the developing countries in the world. We are here from different developing countries. So my request, it's not actually my question, but we do not, as you said, we lack policy. So the policy is the ultimate results from the basic research. I think so. Why not the developed countries like United States, the countries from European Union, UK, Australia, Japan, even in all the developed countries in Asia, though they are supporting from the government level, we have a very unstable government, though it has been stable since 1 year, but we do not have access to those opportunities actually in the universities. So I would like to rethink, I would like to suggest these countries and the government of these countries to rethink for the policy recommendations so that the undergraduate students, graduate students can get better opportunity to engage within the research. So I believe the research is only the way for the development. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, touche, man. Yeah.
Should we just leave it like that?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think, yeah, that's important, but I mean, I think, you know, the more I travel, I think it's also been clear to my head that it is not always up to the foreign countries to carry the weight of my country. What are my people doing? You know, we've been there just as long as any other countries have, right? And so, like, and I think, like, yeah, getting help is great. We had 2015 earthquake in Nepal, 20,000 people died. We got $1 billion from UN and all these foreign nations, and it took about 1 year to even dispel that money. Even right now, 90% of the money is still in the pocket of some corrupt politician. I went to foothills of Nepal where there were signs that said Habitat for Humanity or like paid by, you know, American citizens. They build these toilets for people to use, and instead of using toilets as toilets, they started using toilet to store their firewood, right? Because otherwise it would get wet. And so there are these massive problems with education, and there's only so much that I think a foreign country can come in and help. I mean, there's at one point, I mean, the people themselves need to do something about it. And I think we're in a better situation now because we have a lot of diaspora from Nepal. Like, there was a lot of people from Nepal going to other places, getting education and going back. So I think it might just be a generational thing. Give it 1 more generation or 2 more generations, and I don't know, kind of optimistic that things might get better. Because I think the more globally conscious people that are going back to Nepal, getting the education, getting the world education might be a little bit better about it.
Mm-hmm. All right, we have time for 2 more short questions and short answers. Please go ahead.
So you've discussed the fact that education and research are very important in reaching a solution to these issues, which I'm sure we're all advocates for. But in areas of the world, so for example, I come from the Arab world, where we have this culture of consumerism that is, you know, these topics might not even show up in a lot of situations unless you're talking to extremely educated people. And that's paralleled with the fact that all these issues are under control of politicians and multinational companies, etc. So in that scenario, what role does the individual have in actually making a difference in this, besides conducting research and actually, you know, helping make global change at that scale?
Yeah, you want me to give a short answer to that? That's a heavy question, man. I mean, yeah, I mean, that's a great point, right? And I mean, the only thing that I can say is that, you know, you being here, like, you know, your friends, like, talk to your friends, spread the information. I mean, you can hold like a little symposium, talk about climate change. I mean, the more you communicate, the more people are aware of the problem. So if no one's talking about it, be the first one to talk about it. Hold a climate change symposium or Friday protest like they do in Germany. That's all I can say, yeah.
Last question.
My name is Nyaga Kelvin from Kenya. Thank you for the presentation.
Thanks.
And my question is, everyone globally have the knowledge, the idea on pollution and on the environment effect that it has. And they have the ways to prevent that. But the problem is getting that platform, getting that support from the governments, especially in developing countries. So what do we do as researchers, as the graduates, and let me say students, to ensure that the government emphasizes on prevention of the same?
I think the most important thing that we can do is education, right? I mean, if you have a well-educated global population in the country, the people who are going to be politicians coming out of the country might be much more likely to work on these issues. I think my dad has a very strict way of thinking. I can't change his mind. It's the same thing. If the politicians that you're talking about, they've had this view for 60, 70 years, you go in there, or like 5 other dudes like you go in there, is not going to change their mind. You know, maybe it will. But I think the one thing that's much more a likely solution is that if you and other educators in your country work towards making this really educated population, the next generation will know of these problems, and the politicians and the lawyers and the scientists and the engineers that are coming out of that will be much more likely to work on these issues. But besides that, I don't know, man. It's a bleak problem. Yeah, I wish I had solutions.
And I wish we had more time because this was just such an inspiring session. Thank you very much, Lujendra Ojha.